But there are some allegedly pro-life, very prominent pro-life leaders and influencers who are saying that they will not vote for the Republican ticket because he's not pro-life enough. And so there are some who are saying they're just going to abstain from voting at all. What are your thoughts?
I think it was either in Veritatis Splendor or Donum Vitae. I can't remember which one it was, but John Paul II talks about the what's called the principle of the lesser evil. So I've heard those same kinds of things where people saying that, I'm not going to vote for them because they're now pro-abort or what have you, and which I can see, yeah, it is a problem, and we have to work on that and fight that as well. But the principle of the lesser evil. So let me just kind of parse out that principle just a little bit. It was something which St. Thomas actually talked about. Ironically, he was talking about it in the context of prostitution. So he said, if there's a guy who's a mayor of a city and a bunch of brigands come into the city and they basically seize the city, and in the negotiations with the mayor, they'll say, we will cease and desist, causing all the damage and killing the people and this and that if you continue to allow us to have prostitution. So then St. Thomas says, can you actually do that? And he said, yes, you can, because it's the lesser of two evils, right? And so he kind of parses out the principle in relationship to the lesser of two evils. So in addition to basically you have a situation where there is two evil situations. So in the case of voting, you would have realistically two candidates that one is worse than the other, right? And so that's general. And so none of them are going to be perfect. And so the question becomes, can I vote for the lesser of the two evils in relationship to the candidates? So then John Paul II, of course, reiterates one of the principles that, yeah, you can, because he was talking about, can a politician actually vote for a piece of legislation that would mitigate abortion in most cases, but allow it in others in order to reduce the number of abortions that are actually occurring. And he says, given the principle of the lesser of two evils, he may do so there's two parts to this that people have to have in place. The first is he has to have a moral character that is above question regarding the issue of abortion. So it has to be clear to everybody, this guy's pro-life, and the only reason he's really voting for this is because he's trying to mitigate the amount of abortion. So there has to be that particular thing. So the guy's character has to be up, and there has to be avoiding a scandal in that regard. The second one is one that St. Thomas says, and he says, in relationship to the evil, because this is where people don't get it right. They say, but you're still voting for evil. Actually, no, you're not morally. St. Thomas talks about what's called, it's something in his moral writings. It's all throughout his stuff. He talks about it in a variety of different places, but he talks about it here, and it's called praeter intentionem. And it means something that's aside from your intention. So in this particular case, if you're actually looking at the object of the moral act, that's morally what you're doing. What you're doing is you're not voting evil for evil. Technically speaking, what you're doing is you're voting to preserve the good that would otherwise be lost if you didn't vote, or if you voted for the person that was more evil. So you're actually voting basically your vote, or what you're doing is actually it's mitigating the amount of damage or evil that would otherwise occur. And so in that, you're actually voting to preserve the good that would otherwise be lost. And that the evil that is of the law, or in relationship to the particular candidate, is praeter intentionem. It's aside from your intention. So as long as you're not voting for him because he's evil, or because you're voting for his evil things, but you're precisely voting, your intention is to preserve the good, then what happens is that morally speaking, that's what you're doing. Okay. So then in some of the moral manuals, the question is that it gives you permission. You may vote for this. Now, the question then becomes, and this is where some of the debate sets in, but I'll give you my opinion on it. They say, well, some say you may vote for it, but you're not obligated to vote in that particular situation. And I would say, I think that largely depends on the circumstances. If you're in a situation where, for example, in the case of, let's say a piece of legislation is coming up that would mitigate abortion, and you already know that 75 out of 100 of those who are voting are already said, no, we're going to vote in this piece of legislation so that it mitigates the evil, and you already know that that's going to happen. Okay, well, then you may not necessarily have to vote in a circumstance like that. However, the church has over and over and over again said that we have an obligation to vote as part of our civic duty, specifically in relationship to what's called legal justice, the obligations that we have as individuals to the state, and that for the sake of the common good, and we have an obligation as citizens to do our part to preserve the good to the degree that we can within our confines. And this is a duty. This is not just a you can, it's an obligation and a duty. So I would argue, given the fact that the church has reiterated over and over again that those people who live in democracies and have the right to vote have actually also an obligation to vote for the sake of the common good. And I would think, it seems to me, that you would be obligated to actually vote the lesser of two evils in the upcoming election in order to preserve the good that would otherwise be lost. That's just my own take on it. I know other people have different positions, but it seems to me that if we don't vote to the degree that is, in order to mitigate the evil, then it seems to me we're partially responsible for it. It seems to me.